Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm back with another read through of The Secret Man by Frank Dux. I kind of took a little bit of some time off because I ended up catching a cold. Still feeling a little bit under the weather, but I'm feeling a lot better than I was. But yeah, I want to go ahead and continue on with this read through of The Secret Man by Frank Dux. And today I will be reading Chapter 12, Murmurs in Mulan. Let's begin. If you wanted to find any of the big movers in underworld politics, you could always depend on Mulan. My first stop. It was Italy's window to the rest of the world's businesses and banks, as well as the hub for European arms and drug traffic. Rivers of illicit funds and deals ran through Mulan. Even Mulan's major produce market received millions of dollars hidden in truckloads of oranges or lemons. Franco's bar didn't appear on any tourist map, but among certain circles it was as much a landmark as the Mono La Scilla or Leonardo's Last Supper. Franco's bar possessed an international reputation and an international clientele. In fact, according to rumor, Franco's was one of the few bars or restaurants in Milan not having to cough up a considerable percent of its profits in tangente or payoffs. It was also one of my favorite hangouts in Italy, and the place I'd make the contacts I needed. If Delphi 9 was available on the illicit arms market, someone at Franco's would know. Sure enough, the first face I saw when entering was a familiar one. At a corner table, a muscular, tattooed forearm lifted a glass of milk to the lips of the Chobo Magus, or I can't pronounce that name. Magus, whatever. Okay, the glass held in the air after a moment to make sure his eyes weren't fooling him. The big man leaped to his feet. Franco, he clasped me in a bear hug that to anyone smaller might have proven lethal. I returned the favor. A milk for my friend, La Jumbo bellowed at a waiter I'd never seen before. The Sicilian waiters at Franco's changed almost daily as a precaution, and because Franco's in the mid 1980s was most certainly being used as a conduit and cover for agents of the mafia. If the DIA, Italy's special anti-mafia police, knew about Franco's, though it kept quiet. Okay, sit, he encouraged. Lejumbo was a no-nonsense Siberian outlaw and ex-boxer, as tough as they come. After surviving a stabbing that cost him a kidney, he had resumed his boxing career. Hell, I'd box with only one arm, he roared at me one time. What's a kidney? We had hit it off from the beginning, a strange connection indeed, since Sovereigns tended to be loners. They operated alone and possessed a reputation for savagery, mitigated only by their own code of honor. They might kill one another with a viciousness horrifying to those outside the code, but no Siberian outlaw informs on another Serb. I think Lajumbo respected me because of my fighting abilities. He had seen me fight under circumstances in which savagery was necessary for survival. Perhaps the fact that he never understood me played a part in our friendship. I mystified him. He couldn't understand why, with my abilities, I didn't actually join the underworld and rise to the top. Lajumbo spent a lot of time in Milan and was well known to Italy's criminal pole, but he worked in Frankfurt. Lajumbo dominated a large part of the Frankfurt underworld along with his partner Reb a handsome rogue who sported the finest items he could get his hands on. Whenever possible, traveled to Italy to play high-stakes poker. He had picked up the handle of Senti from his habit of never betting more or less than 100,000 lower whatever. Later he would become the reputed head of the Gimbono crime family and Munanchi and his credited with having outsmarted the German judicial system so badly that German officials changed the law specifically to deport him. His specialty involved I'll leave a caption, I can't read that word. Arms deals. According to those in the know, he certainly supplies all sides in the war in former Yugoslavia with everything from bullets to tanks. If I needed hardware, he was the man to see. Whether he was dealing in bioweapons, however, I wasn't certain. I'd soon find out. Since the 1960s, Germany was a home away from home for the Yugoslavian and Sicilian mafia. German police either didn't realize or else turned a blind eye. The mafia was everywhere, hiding among hard-working Italian immigrants and working just as hard behind the pizza parlors, though they dealt drugs and weapons and laundered money. For years, Germany had provided the Turkish mafia, its central outpost for drugs and arms shipments as well. So you fighting the Jubo demanded I want to be there. I retired, I informed him. No, how can you do such a thing? You break my heart. A man must fight his entire life. He pounded on his broad chest for emphasis. There are different ways of fighting, I responded. I'm giving my head a break before it gets broken. You know how many times I've been hit and kicked in the head? The Jumbo grins. About as many as me. You just have a harder head, I remember. I'm thinking that guy's head has got to be solid rock. There's nothing inside, just solid rock. Coming from a Jumbo, such a statement was, I knew, a compliment. The Jumbo taking blows to the head was more impressive than any amount of brains could ever be. Remember Voyo? He asked. How could anyone forget Voyo? I answered. Voyo Gorik was one man I definitely hesitate bumping heads with. If there ever was living evidence of a massive link in Darwin's evolutionary ladder, it was Voyo, and no one heard of ever beat, or no one I heard of ever beat him in a fist fight, even if Voyo was fighting more than one opponent at a time. He and Jumbo once took on an entire soccer team of anti-Cerberus slums, and after reducing the team to pulp, forced them to sing Cerberan folk songs until they finally lost their voices as well as their balls. The tone of the Jumbo's question worried me. He's not in prison, is he? The Jumbo shook his head, muttering, worse. Dead? Even worse, Jumbo said, maintaining his deadpan. He's living in America. The prospect of being reunited with Voyo when I got home, if that is, I got home, put me in a good mood. He had always referred to me as his Jewish brother, and in fact, later on, Voyo and I did meet up again in Los Angeles when Voyo had landed himself a job as a bodyguard for Sylvester Stallone. Okay, not only that, but Voyo had appeared on the big screen as well. In Rambo 2, he played the Russian Spetsnaz, Soviet Special Forces soldier. Rambo fist fights in the helicopter. During the filming, Voyo shouted at Stallone to punch him for real. His intensity spooked Big and Little Tony Stallone's other bodyguards enough to make them draw their weapons on Voyo. Like many suburban gangsters whose violently and unpredictable rages have prevented the penetration of their small inner circles, Voyo could become explosive without warning. He was also a pretty good actor. I'm going into business, I told Lajumbo. I'm after something big. I have a client. I stopped abruptly, letting the possibilities multiply in the air all around us, then shrugged to let Lajumbo know that I couldn't talk, but whoever it was, my employer was impressive. From what I understand, somebody sparked an anthrax outbreak at a biowarfare facility in Sverdlovsk in order to cover up the theft of something else, something bigger. Lajumbo glanced around the bar. He had stayed alive this long because caution had become a second sense. I heard that he said later. I didn't press him. Whatever Lajumbo decided to tell me, he would tell me when he was ready. At the end of the bar stood a man bulging with muscles, an unlit cigarette nestled behind his ear, and he downed a beer as if it were a shot of whiskey, but shrank back when Jumbo approached the bar to order a Coca-Cola. The movement reminded me of a scene a few years back, only the man at the bar was a guy known as Montero, a former construction worker who had the reputation of being a habitual gambler and a poor sport. After shot a man just to get back the money he had lost in a game of craps. Sermon and then pickpockets in Manach decided to use him as their protection man, and Schickler, the one who bumps and holds the victim while a partner relieves him of his wallet from behind. The smartest and most talented pickpockets I have employed while on assignment have been from Sarajevo. Their modest operandi involves working crowded trains throughout Europe. On an average day, they can make more money than a mid-level dope dealer can in a week. The risk of getting caught depends on how often they fish the same pond. So the Sarajevo pickpockets, based in Munich, track throughout Europe during the week, sometimes spending a weekend in Milan before moving on to work the trains and streetcars of Zurich. Australian police told me that Wavo was a brute who preyed on the poor to support his gambling habits. One night in Milan, after Raid cleared him out in a high-stakes game, Veldo waited for him outside and shot Raid 3 times before fleeing into the dark. Raid did not die, but shortly after the shooting, he was apprehended by the authorities and spent a year in jail, giving a from spit from vengeance. Later, though, Lajumbo and Raid reconnected in Frankfurt and received word that Vallejo was in Vienna. According to stories, they kidnapped Vallejo's friend Rosso and forced Rosso to set Vallejo up using the tale of a high-stakes poker party as a lure. When Vallejo entered the room, he had 2 guns tucked into his pants, but they did him no good. In a flash, a Coke bottle broke against a counter, and Vallejo died with a slashed throat. The Australian police barely investigated. They were glad to be rid of him. In the old days, Franco's became even livelier late at night, especially after the boyish entrance of a man known as Bosco. Later, I heard he became a mafia chieftain and was reported to be U.S. organized crime boss John Gotti's personal button man. The last rumor circulating about Bosco involved his kicking the hell out of a half-dozen law enforcement officers trying to cuff him and shooting 3 of them with one of their own guns. He is now thought to be hiding out in the Italian Alps. In the old days, if you needed a strong man, Bosco was the person to see. At the bar, he was often accompanied by Marco, a smuggler who could get anything I wanted, wherever I wanted it. In a moment, I saw the reason Lajumbo had cautioned me to wait and walked a member of Zilko this gang. The man's thick wall of eyebrows registered a leap of surprise when he spotted me. Otherwise, his face remains passive, at least what one could see of it, due to his heavy beard. Rather than approaching us, he lowered himself into a chair across the room from us. I wondered why. The last I knew, Lajemo and Zilko were friends. I wasn't asking any questions, though. I'd find out eventually. Come on, let's go to dinner, Lajemo said, standing. I don't want to be where I have to look at that at that asshole. We left Franco's, crossing the street to my favorite hotel in Milan. Dada Kravakic had introduced me to the place. A small man, but as fast as a cobra. Dada bore an uncanny resemblance to Robert De Niro. He might have had a brilliant career as an Olympic gymnast, but his aspirations were cut short when he punched a man in an argument. The other man went down, struck his head on the pavement, and died. Dada fled to Guinea, where he now owns a truck company and is still a man to be feared. He always knew whom to see and whom to avoid. If I needed to get a fake passport or to locate a fence who might have come across a particular item, Dada was an organizational genius and a walking dictionary. The yellow pages of the European underworld, the Tortilla, brought back many memories. Here I had first met Misko Ragaran, who introduced me to the chopped automatic shotgun I favored, and even showed me how to hide it, and a 50-round drum carried separately on my wide-shouldered torso under a sports coat. Miso had started out as a pickpocket. However, after being jailed in Sweden, he hooked up with the Italian mafia, who trained him as a bank robber. Eventually, he was killed playing quick draw on the very night of his mother's arrival in town to visit him. Lajemo and I tucked ourselves behind a small table in the corner. Everything is changing, Lajemo eliminated. Everything's too organized. Deals everywhere. The Yakuza, the Triads, Colombians, Turks, Kurds, They've all been here. Hell, there's a Chinese restaurant on every fucking block of every city in Germany, and you know what? They're all empty. First things first, I ordered wine, and Lejumbo indulged in another milk. Everybody makes deals with the fucking Sicilians. Lejumbo continued shaking his head. The Russians worship the Sicilians. They even have to kill someone. A relative or friend is best in order to get into the organization, just like the Sicilians. Fuck organizations. I think he missed the days when a maverick stood a real chance. He had to make deals and alliances to survive, but in his heart, Lejumbo was a lone wolf. I saw a Oyaban for the Yamaguchi Guma in Frankfurt last week. He exclaimed he was eating pizza. The Yamaguchi Gumi was the most powerful Yakuza group. They rented out special killers outside of Japan, and Oyabun was a top Yakuza boss. The triads are bringing chinks in here in Milan faster than you can count them. A buddy of mine has been driving them to Yugoslavia in his taxi, $5,000 American apiece. Hell, if all the Chinese working illegally in Italy came out of the woodwork, there wouldn't be room for the Italians. But the Chinese and the Italians have always gotten along. Why? Hell, if I've got a clue. He was right. Over the past few years, I'd seen Sicilians swarming all over Thailand. All sorts of connections existed. I didn't have to mention that the main currency launderer for the Colombian cartels he lived right here in Milan. He had one of the best racing stables in Europe. The Russians have started showing up too. Ukrainians, Georgians, all sorts. They like Germany best, and they're into everything. They're stealing lessons left and right. So you're getting a lot of Soviet material. You said it. We get everything from the Soviets: tanks, jets, machine guns. So to come, most of it comes from the organization, Russian mafia, or the KGB. Although sometimes it's hard to tell them apart, he laughed. I ordered my favorite angry because of the red pepper flakes that made it hot and aroused the taste buds. Sure, I remember Lejumbo kidded Franco, "Don't get him hot," he roared. I was glad I had caught Lejumbo in a good humor. The sight, the slightest thing sometimes sent him into swollen mood that could last for days. If Lejumbo was in one of his moods, he refused to talk to anyone. Getting a word out of him would have been impossible. The door burst open, and in walked a guy almost as large as me. Anyone large definitely stood out among the diminutive Italians. This guy reminded me of one of the biggest and strongest men I'd met, a gangster nicknamed Cyclops, after the Cyclops giants. Without exaggeration, his legs and arms revealed the thickness of tree trunks. I remember him seated at a nearby table with one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen, running her hands through his hair. She was a high-class call girl who had supposedly needed the Gideon's mob good money. Needed the mob good money and annual 6-digit figure in U.S. currency over the past 6 years. The mob warns Cyclops that he and the woman could live together, even get married for all it cared, but she still had to work for them. I had the special treat of being present to see Cyclops beat the mafia messenger and his 3 huge bodyguards bloody. After friends warned me not to hang out with him, sure enough, the very next week, 2 boys on motorbikes pulled up along each side of Cyclops' car at a stoplight. Before he could react, they shot him to death. According to Zilko data, he had arranged the hit to win favor with the Genio mob. Another source claimed it wasn't data at all, but right. One thing was for sure, the hit had the participation of someone in Franco's small circle of friends. Cyclops' murder reminded me that going back to old hunts didn't necessarily provide a pleasant trip down memory lane. Lejumbo gave the newcomer a quick glance, then dismissed him, turning his attention to his Gunochi. You said you were after something special, I think. I have an idea of what you're looking for. If you ask me, don't get mixed up with those Russian assholes. I'll tell you to, not just as a friend, but because I respect the way you fight. Everyone's joining forces. You go against one group now, and you're dealing with them all. The whole world's become one fucking international corporation. It's the same with the gangs as with the legitimate companies. Although there aren't that many corporations left that haven't been bought up with drug and arms money. I hear you, I answered, but yeah, I know you've got a hard head. He laughed with gusto. You'll need to see Sibel or Renning in Dusseldorf, but don't tell them I sent you. He paused as if mulling something over, and then heaved himself back into conversation. Listen, this stays between you and me. I think the groundwork's being laid for a scam. That's just my feeling. Jimbo checked his watch. Franco, my friend, I'm sorry, but I must go. I'm flying to Amsterdam. A shipment of orange juice is coming in. What he most likely meant was a shipment of cocaine packed in plastic sacks and hidden in cans of frozen orange juice. That was the last time I saw Lajumbo. Our paths didn't cross again. And in 1986, when summoned to appear at the Nachi principal courthouse, Lajumbo was shot down on the steps in broad daylight, and with more than half a dozen German policemen present, allegedly by his longtime friend Zelko. To my knowledge, Zelko was never charged with the crime, but he did serve 8 years in jail afterward. After his release, Zelko returned to Belgrade and formed his own family, only to be gunned down himself within a year or so. Maybe someone owed Lajumbo a favor. After Lajumbo's death, my sources in Europe informed me that Interpol had met in Brussels in late 1985 and early 1986 to plan the breakup of the Lajumbo Red partnership. They obviously succeeded, using Zelko as interesting an individual as Lajumbo was. As far as the business of crime goes, for every Lajumbo, there are always 100 more to take his place. After dinner, I poked my head in the Piper's Club, a disco frequented by mercenaries waiting for work, but nothing much was happening. A few drunken loudmouths sat at a table, barely bothering to take in my arrival. I didn't like big mouths. They would never work for me. The most dangerous mercs tended to be quiet and more often than not alone. Teamwork was essential in many successful operations. However, one's dependence on the trust in a spotter sniper marriage, for example, was based on professional respect, not friendship or emotional camaraderie. Mercs had hangouts across the globe. In Paris, you could find mercs near the Rue d'Amatory, the Transvestite Quarter, and a place where the locals' hatred for the police would keep the most wanted felons' presence a secret. Here within the hunt of thieves and prostitutes, you sometimes discovered a human embodiment of strange innocence and wisdom. In such stark contrast to its surroundings that it left you astonished, even bewildered. One such incarnation manifests itself in the form of a person boy called Kiki. He had befriended Mitchell Ox, a war veteran who could not speak. At night, he would bake little cakes. He would bake little cakes for the Persian pigeons, and during the day he roamed, throwing the cakes into the air. In the parks, the birds covered him, perched on his shoulders and head. Afterward, he was off to the local bistro where he met Kiki and the other inhabitants of the place. I listened with amusement to Kiki's conversations of politics and love, and his attempts to collect girls' phone numbers, despite the fact that he couldn't write. Kiki's comments often seemed the wisest of the lot. Even though he was only 5 years old, leaning up against the bar like a shuriken, but enthusiastic little man, he always knew the right questions to ask, and the simple and obvious answers always seemed implicated in the questions themselves or his unadorned comments concerning the widest variety of topics. Never argue with a girl, he once told me in all seriousness, and as far as I saw, he never did. At my previous wanderings through Paris, I had happened upon many strange sights, but perhaps the strangest occurred one month when dead cats seemed to appear everywhere. I learned later that the animals' bodies were filled with cocaine or heroin and then left at drop points. No one fooled with the carcasses except the drug buyers. Later, I adopted this ploy for my drops with the Soviets. Legumbo's cryptic comments intrigued me. Obviously, Solobo or Marin were somehow tied to something big. Whether it had any connection to Delta 9 remained to be seen. I mulled over what I had learned so far. Things were falling into place, not only for this particular mission, but overall as well, and confirming my suspicion that one reason that Casey and the Soviets considered me useful for this mission was my underworld connections. I was also finding out what Casey meant by wanting an echo. Just as some people claim that there are three kinds of great loves, the archetypal love of one's dreams, the love we attain, and the love forms from the blinding of the first two. There exist three broad types of clandestine spies. The intelligence specialist moves in the exotic clandestine world of espionage, supported by skills of observation and information gathering. The second category, counterintelligence, requires the patience of a saint and a highly analytical ability to index and cross-reference thousands of tidbits of information that might form the pieces of a complex puzzle. Lastly, the covert operative, like me, is a blend of the two, one primary and critical ability of elite covert operatives without official links to the agency, often referred to as echoes. Extraordinary circumstances covert operatives lies in their ability to move effectively and unnoticed within the criminal underworld. This underworld is tapped into a network of information that exceeds that of most, if not all, governments. Moreover, the information one receives is freer of political rhetoric or ideology-based bias. Ironically, information received from underground sources tends to be more reliable. Although it was general knowledge that the CIA had often used criminals as informants and that the agency itself was not above criminal activity, Casey had indicated that he wanted me to serve as a possible liaison with organizations and individuals that might discredit the agency. Perhaps he wanted to avoid some of the same political fallout that ex-CIA Director George Bush later experienced due to allegations that he met and established direct ties to Central America terrorists. Now, though, it was obvious that the Soviets had their own problems and wanted to use me for similar ends. We'd see. I didn't like going on incomplete or false information. If they wanted my help, they were going to have to provide me with something more than the anthrax story. What in the world was Delta 9? Finding out was the first item of my agenda. The second item was an even more daunting one. If Delta 9 existed, where in the world was it? That is it for Chapter 12. Hopefully you enjoyed. Next time I will read Chapter 13, Dusseldorf. And I hope I'm saying that correctly. But yeah, I'm almost at the halfway mark, almost halfway done with this read-through of the book. Till next time, take care, everyone.